Hi, welcome. I'm Heather Dahl, CEO of Indicio, and joining me today to talk about establishing trust with verifiable credentials and zero trust is Mike Vesey, who's CEO of IdRamp, and Chase Cunningham, who is Dr. Zero Trust. And so we're going to actually kick it off today by taking a look at never trust, always verify, which I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Zero Trust.
Hey, thank you, Heather. So yeah, I think we've definitely thrown the word trust into this brief quite a bit. Don't do shots when you hear the word trust because you won't make it through about slide 6. But what we're trying to get to here is for people to understand ZT, zero trust, is a real thing. There's a strategy in place. It's doable. Verifiable credentials fit very well into that mantra, into that overall strategic position. And these are some of the things that we should think about when we're thinking about a ZT approach. So if we look at the breaches, and I think this week we had some major ones, last week there was some major one, it just continues. The question really should be, what have we figured out that is the common thread across all these compromises? It doesn't matter how much money an organization spends. It doesn't matter if it's a Russian threat group or a Chinese APT or some dude living in his mom's basement drinking too much Monster. The hacks continue. So there's got to be a common thread. Well, if you look at the data, the metrics, the statistics that say how these things occur, it's pretty simple. Accounts, usernames, excessive privileges, and continued access. And I have a picture here of the Lockheed Martin kill chain. There's some things in that we kind of have to accept are going to happen. There's nothing I can do about reconnaissance. People can go look at your enterprise. They can find avenues of exploitation. That's just literally like, you can't stop people from walking up and down the street. The internet's one big street, if you will. Weaponization, I can't stop that because anytime someone creates a new thing, somebody somewhere will find a way to break said thing. That is the nature of engineering. We will find a way to break stuff that's been built. Now, the things that I can do is if I manage, maintain, and control things like accounts and bad usernames and excessive privileges and the ability to move laterally in a network, I can take away the ability to successfully deliver and exploit installed additional tools, achieve command and control, and exfiltrate data. So in reality, this concept that we've had as far as Lockheed Martin kill chain, where we've said the bad guys only got to be right once, we're kind of up against the wall. If we approach the problem differently and we remove the thing that is necessary for these things to be successful, which is a trusted relationship inside of a system, we can take back 5 of those 7 pieces of this puzzle. That's a power position. I'll give up less than half of the problem space if I can win with more than half. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's go to the next slide. Really, what we're talking about is removing their ability to access the system. No, we've said, you probably heard this conversation a lot. The most secure computer is one that a human never touches. Well, that's not going to work. We have to make sure that access is available to users. However, we have to make sure that they're not able to move laterally within systems just because they're a user on a network. We can't imbue a user with trust just writ large. It cannot just be default trust built into systems. That is what continues to cause these compromises and allows them to go from bad to cataclysmic. The traditional way of blocking networks and taking care of the blocking and tackling of systems has been through a perimeter-based model of security. The perimeter-based model of security has categorically failed. We know that. We must approach these things differently. If we can remove the ability for the adversary to operate in a trusted manner with excessive access within a system, we begin to take back some of the power. 3 to 6% of workers are going to click on a phishing link no matter what. You can train people all day long. You can glue their hands to the table. They'll click it with their nose. Uber just proved this. Literally, there was an individual that had been working in a third party related to Uber. Organizationally, they had multi-factor authentication in place. He got really tired of someone that was password spraying and getting him additional MFA prompts. And what did he do? He authorized it because he was sick of it and clicked and let that thing occur. You're going to continue to have phishing that's going to cause compromise. We should not trust people to be able to keep up with these technical threats on the internet. Ireland had a big, massive compromise, literally for one person clicking a system. Why was that a massive compromise? Because of one person clicking on something, because of trust that was built into the system. If we allow users to operate with inherent trust and we just let them move around networks, we're actually powering the bad guy's capability set. This is the fundamental issue that we have to deal with in the space, period, point blank, end of story. Don't trust users. Don't trust systems, don't trust inherent connections, don't trust default configurations, don't trust access. Remove trust. Now, how do you do that? That's really the question. COVID additionally helped us understand that we can't operate in the old model anymore. If everyone's not aware of this, there was this big giant thing called COVID that changed the way that we work, and now we've had to change the way that we live. Statistically speaking, about 26% of us will never go back to the office full time. I'm at home right now. I'm working and I'm connected to some application on infrastructure that I don't own. I'm running across a system that I don't manage, maintain, or control anymore, but I'm working. I'm doing my job. There's an additional exponential increase in remote connectivity. All of us, I think, on this session are not in the office. We are all remote. There will continue to be more remote access provided to users. And the increase of BYOD is exponential as well. Why? Because organizations figured out really quickly that it didn't make any sense for them to buy machines when everyone already had them at home. Why can't I just put you in a place where I can apply a control and help you operate in a more secure fashion? But I have to be able to do those things that will push the control plane out to the user through the internet, use the fabric of the infrastructure, and help secure everybody across all of these many, many moving points. There are three very basic principles for a zero trust approach. This is literally the crayon version of ZT. All that you have to do is verify explicitly all the time, everything. You must always employ least privilege access, because there's no reason for a regular user, a regular entity, or regular access to just be getting unfettered communication across the space. And we have to assume that everything is compromised. If I do those three things, I am enabling zero trust. There's a whole bunch of different ways to enable zero trust. There are many different pieces of technology that can power that. And this is a choose your own adventure to enable the strategy. But if I can accept the reality of the space in which I operate, if I understand that those are the business requirements, this is how we live, this is how we operate, and that there are fundamental issues that the bad guy is going to exploit, which is trust. If I do these three things at the very basic level, again, there's always more you can do, you're beginning to enable ZT. And these things can be built into systems, into capabilities, into current infrastructure, architecture, applications that enable this approach and remove the bad guy's ability to continually be successful. There is a global movement going on for ZT. This is huge. It's getting bigger all the time. There was a Biden executive order that came out very soon, actually in May, I believe. There's another one getting ready to come out in October. Basically, the majority of the DoD, almost 100% now, is moving towards or adopting zero trust. Banks are moving towards adopting zero trust. Healthcare. I was talking with an organization in Africa this week that's moving towards a zero trust approach. There's a massive global market here. This is a really good thing because it means that there's a realization that there's a way to fix this problem. There's a way to do security better. There are technologies and capabilities that can help enable it. And organizations see that and they're starting to gravitate towards it. And this is a singular strategic movement. This is not just a mealy sort of approach to these things to do that. This is literally a global movement towards enabling ZT. It's getting bigger all the time. Australian Essential 8 is set. And the reality of what we're dealing with here is that there's a massive market opportunity. There's a way to change the game. And these technologies that we're going to talk about here help enable the actual trust that we have to operate in a system more safely and securely. What we want to get to is a trustable, right? This is where things kind of flip and you have to open your mind a bit. We're talking about getting towards a trustable system. Now, it's like Chase, you just said zero trust a whole lot of times. Yes, we're trying to get rid of the trust that causes compromises, that enables threats, increases risk exponentially. We want to get to a space where what we've gotten rid of is no longer the problem. Now we don't have to manage a very small piece of this puzzle. So being able to operate in a trusted manner makes things better for everybody. We achieve compliance, security is better, scalability, open source, and also eventually opening it up to where we're able to do this at speed and at scale across more digitized ecosystems.
Well, with that, I'm going to turn it over here and talk a little bit more about trustable digital ecosystems and how can you actually build those in a way that supports the zero trust framework. The fact is that decentralized identity is often the way to power that. If you're never going to trust and you're always going to verify, you also need to look at where is the identity coming from for your zero trust approach. And first, let's talk about what is a verifiable credential. We're hearing more and more about verifiable credentials and how they're being used. More global enterprises and governments are moving towards this standard. A verifiable credential, just to level set, is a tamper-evident credential. The authorship is cryptographically verified, and it also follows the W3C web standard that was recently approved. What a verifiable credential does is it makes trusted information portable. That's key. Oftentimes, people equate decentralized identity with human identity. But the fact is, whether it is information or claims about a human's identity or pieces of information, maybe about a device or an organization or a document, all those data points can be rolled up into a verifiable credential. And what makes this different is that in order to verify the data within it, the organization who's doing the verification doesn't have to check in with the source or the organization who issued it. It doesn't need a direct integration. Instead, the verification is done through the signatures on the credential. So that means, one, it significantly reduces integration costs. It reduces attack vectors because you're not directly integrating into other systems. And it also enables offline verification. And so for many organizations, it expands the use cases, being able to obtain immediately actionable verified data from a credential without a direct integration. Some of the use cases that are actively working in this is that the government of Aruba, working with CETA, the airline technology provider, are using verifiable credentials. A year ago, they were using them to provide proof of vaccination or testing for COVID, but now they are moving this project to provide the digital travel credential, which provides the information about the individual to be approved through an embarkation card, which is the paper you often fill out on the plane before landing. And the traveler is able to receive approval and that ED card before they even get on the plane. And so what this does is it helps create a seamless travel experience. But then if you have a verifiable credential that the government has approved someone to cross the border with, it also opens up opportunities for adjacent industries to use that same credential. So in the case of travel, that's for hotels and restaurants and event venues and car rentals to also pick up and utilize the same credentials. What a traditional data transfer often looks like is you have API calls, right? I'm telling everyone here what we know. We know that they are costly. It is really hard to do a data transfer with API calls at massive scale. For instance, let's say every country, airport, and airline in the world, right? That is extremely hard. And it requires specific permission for data access. Verifiable credentials extends us beyond this point in time. And so when you look at a verifiable credential data transfer, this is how we break it down. And this is the bread and butter for everything Mike's going to talk about here going forward, is you have an issuer organization who provides the credential to a holder. That credential can be held in a wallet that's held in a device, in a cloud wallet, a hybrid. The holder, although you see an image of a human here, the holder could be a company, it can be a device, it can be, doesn't necessarily have to be a human. And then that credential is shared with consent by the holder to the verifier. The distributed ledger is used to verify the credential signature. It allows for also offline verification. In the case of you're in environments where online verification just isn't possible because of service, or your use case requires it at certain points in the process. And with that, now that I set you up with the trust triangle, I'm also hearing it called the trust trapezoid lately, Mike. I'm going to turn it over to you to really dive in to the use cases and what IdRamp has been doing, connecting verifiable credentials with FIDO. So it's over to you, Mike.
Thank you. Thanks, Heather. Yeah, and I'm going to try and take the everything that we just heard of. Chase gave an excellent overview what zero trust is and how it really can be complicated to deploy because of the many different vectors. And I'm going to also explain a little more on decentralized identity and why it's important. And then ultimately, we're going to tie this together and how FIDO can help us with this strategy and really unify and provide us a better bridge. And ultimately, doing the orchestration layer of FIDO is going to allow cost savings as well, which I know is counterintuitive. Most of the time we think about evolving technology and it gets more expensive. We actually have the opportunity to save some money by moving this process to the middle. So I'm going to close with explaining decentralization and how it can benefit those velocities. So decentralized identities is an interesting quote from Gartner that came out, and they're anticipating, as well as all the other analysts, anticipating this new thing, the new decentralized identity standard that's going to come out. This is not necessarily self-sovereign identity, right? We hear that a lot. It doesn't mean, and all the stuff that Heather just talked about, verifiable credentials, please don't misunderstand. That does not mean that this is some magic identity that's created by all these things that might be floating around in the metaverse or something. The verifiable credentials are just a decentralized way of doing things that we do every day today. It's putting that information in the edge that the holder can bring with them. And by combining that with the security and the authentication structure that FIDO provides, we can do some really cool things. So we're seeing this across all different sectors, as this slide represents. Probably no single place with larger amount of growth than public sector, because they really had a lot of challenges going into the pre-COVID world. They weren't set up as to handle the type of remote interactions as well as maybe the traditional enterprise. So lots of growth in the decentralized public sector, and we're seeing production deployments today across the board. The Cardia project that Heather was just referring to, the CETA integration that Aruba is doing. North Dakota's got a project. There's a lot of production projects today that are using decentralized principles. All right, so let's go a little bit deeper and talk about FIDO and decentralized identity. So FIDO and decentralized identity they're both great complements to a zero trust strategy. Inevitably, verifiable credential specifications and FIDO specifications are going to converge. We're going to see those technologies become complementary because FIDO is great for authentication and verifiable credentials are awesome for carrying the metadata, for the data behind that. So by combining those two, using those FIDO rails and mining the information contained within the credentials, we not only get a next generation authentication solution, but we also get access management and everything else that we can do with that in a purely decentralized manner. So we don't have to continually phone home to make those policy decisions. At the end of the day, decentralized identity is just another IDP, right? I want you to kind of simplify that in your mind and think of how, when you're incorporating decentralized identity, it's really just another identity source that you in the enterprise or wherever have to try and accommodate. The value is that we can do that in a purely decentralized way, so the cost of supporting it can be somewhat less. Okay, so let's talk about why it's important. As we know, and as we've heard reportedly, the most common complaint from managing identity is really the poor integration with new tools and applications and getting the help to integrate these new strategies. So it's great to deploy a new identity source or deploy a new factor provider or like a FIDO process, but unless we have the ability to actually put that in front of all of our identity orchestration processes and our service delivery ecosystem, we really struggle. And traditionally, the really tight bind between the identity layer and the factor layer is somewhat restrictive there. It really hinders our ability to make that as ubiquitous as it needs to be. So by tying those together, we in the middle, in an orchestration layer, we can see great value in the deployment. So let's talk about that. Let's dive into the decentralized orchestration platform or layer. What this means essentially is we're taking the rigid structure, we're delivering our FIDO service as a SaaS with the ability to connect to any legacy identity provider, any number of applications, serving any number of users. And by doing this, we achieve a great deal of flexibility and granularity. We can build policies, right? So now, instead of having a rigid policy coming from your identity provider across maybe all services, I believe what we're going to see is the industry is going to supporting more granular recipes of policies that can be deployed across application suites and identity providers. So you only get that type of velocity by putting this in the middle in the orchestration layer, as opposed to in the identity provider layer. So it's a fundamental shift. And we're definitely seeing all the major identity providers supporting orchestration in some way, shape, or form, the ability to do that in a open standard way so that we can incorporate things like decentralized identity. We're going to see a lot of evolution in that space. We think it's critical that any identity strategy be able to incorporate not only traditional identity sources, but also decentralized identity sources, and especially verifiable credentials, as Heather was explaining. So really easy and cost-effective to add to those, and it really mitigates that sprawl and drives your zero trust strategy. So this is a little more support, and I guess I'd love to just take credit for this and say, gosh, I came up with all this decentralized orchestration stuff myself. The reality is we're hearing it all over the place. This spring at the European Identity Conference, Martin Kuppinger coined the composable enterprise. And what the composable enterprise is basically everything I was just talking about. It's creating a flexible UI and policies that are driven by business need, as opposed to a rigid structure of what can or can't be done out of the identity layer. It's the ability to connect to disparate ecosystems and share trust, innovate, try new features, and ultimately, the takeaway, it's easy to deploy things like FIDO to any number of services across any number of IDPs via a business policy, as opposed to a rigid structure. So instead of going back to the IDP and paying the toll charge to enable that FIDO process, by doing it in the middle, you can pay for what you use and deploy it across any of those identity platforms. So we think you're going to see a dramatic shift to deploying things like FIDO and all of your other factor providers in the composable enterprise model in a decentralized way in the middle. So all those different things, they're ready to go right now, as I think we've shown. There are platforms out there that do decentralized identity delivery and support decentralization. We're seeing a lot of growth and evolution in that area, and so we're thrilled to be in that space. It's definitely an exciting time, and thanks for watching.
Thank you, Mike. And I think important message today is if you're in the FIDO community and you're looking to build with verifiable credentials and experiment, you're looking to bring in a zero trust framework in this. Chase Cunningham, Dr. Zero Trust, Mike Vesey with IdRamp, both available to help you to start building and exploring verifiable credentials today. I'm Heather Dahl with Indicio, and on behalf of the three of us, I want to thank you for joining us today.